Now that we've discussed trade, we want to pay a bit more attention to flows of capital and currency. So we'll define a concept called net capital outflow, which is basically the amount of foreign assets purchased by domestic residents minus domestic assets purchased by foreign investors. That's our definition of net capital outflow. So it's basically all of the capital investment flowing out of the country minus the investment flowing into the country. And by definition, our net capital outflow is equal to net exports. So I mentioned earlier that we don't want to necessarily think of a trade deficit as a bad thing, but it does imply to us that if exports are greater than imports, if we have a trade deficit, then net capital outflow will also be negative. And that means that more domestic assets are being purchased by foreign investors than foreign assets being purchased by domestic investors. In other words, when we have a trade deficit, that means that we have negative net capital outflow, or I'll just say capital inflow, right? Capital is flowing into our country to finance that trade deficit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that we are borrowing more money than we are saving internationally, okay? And so on net, people are investing in our economy, betting that it is going to continue to grow and be productive over the long term. When we think about the relationship between saving and net exports, we can also find some interesting conclusions. So let me just remind you this national income identity. We have output equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. So a country's savings rate is actually a very important determinant of long-run economic growth. In a closed economy, net exports is equal to 0. So my saving is equal to Y minus C minus G or I, right? Savings is equal to domestic investment. But when we look at an open economy, now net exports is not equal to 0. And so our savings rate is going to be equal to I plus net exports, because net exports, okay, is not equal to 0. Now, net exports, we just realized, is the same thing as net capital outflow. So our savings rate will be equal to I plus our net capital outflow. In other words, all savings within the US economy can be either invested domestically or invested abroad.